So, croeso cynnes iawn I chi, a diolch yn fawr am ymuno â ni am ein dosbarth meistr yng nghwmni yr Athro Lyn Sharratt prynawn 'ma. Fel mae'r digwyddiad yn mynd yn ei blaen, mae croeso I chi nodi eich sylwadau a'ch cwestiynau trwy y chat function a hoffwn derbyn eich cyfraniad yn y modd hwn. Mae'r sesiwn, fel y gwydwch chi, yn cael ei recordio ac felly bydd ar gael hwyrach ymlaen ar ein gwefan. Unwaith eto, mae'r Athro Sharratt fel nifer o academyddion blaen llaw wedi dod I weithio hefo Cyngor y Gweithio Addysg trwy'r partneriaeth arachog sydd gyda ni rhwng ni a Prifysgol Abertawe. In this regard, I would really like to thank Professor Alma Harris for her personal contribution and that of her colleagues for facilitating this. And without further ado, I'd like to hand you over to Alma for her introduction of our esteemed guest. Have a wonderful afternoon, everyone.
Thank you, Angela, and it's my honour and privilege to welcome Lyn to this particular masterclass. I mean, Lyn is no stranger to Wales, and we've been very fortunate to have her working with us for the last 2 years. She is a visiting scholar at the University of Swansea, and in that auspice, she comes to our partnership with the EWC, which is flourishing and has flourished over many years. I want to thank the EWC actually for their support and expertise in putting this masterclass together, but also the previous partnership arrangements that we've had. As Angela said, Lyn is internationally known, and I'm not going to read her CV, but just to say that she has worked in Australia, in Canada, and now, luckily for us, in Wales. Her time in Wales has not been easy. She's worked with schools in the regions in the most challenging of times, which is COVID. But I think the impact of her work on schools is second to none. And we are really fortunate that she's been able to stay the course with us and make the project funded by the Welsh Government a huge success. Those of you who know Lyn, and I'm privileged to know her, I've known her for many years, I call her a colleague and a friend. She is very much someone who walks the talk. She doesn't deal in theory that much, she deals in practice, the reality of schools, the reality of classrooms. So we're really in for a treat this afternoon. Lyn is essentially someone who has great commitment that shines through. She also has great compassion. She understands schools, she understands the challenges of being in a school environment. But ultimately, and I'm sorry if this is a little bit corny, but she has great clarity when it comes to what works and what matters in the school environment. So Lyn, we're hugely grateful to you, and we welcome you, Croeso Cymru, we welcome you to Wales again, even though it's virtually.
Oh, thank you so much, Alma. I really appreciate that. I really appreciate the introduction to our time together. And I want to welcome everyone, teachers and leaders, and note the title of my presentation, Everyone is a Leader. And I want us to think about that as we spend the next couple of hours together. And what does that look like if you're a teacher, if you are a leader? What are some takeaways from this session that are practical for you to implement tomorrow? So let's begin. I want to bring greetings from Canada and just a really quick look at what Canada looks like just now. There we are in the snow. Well, it's a pretty accurate picture of what it looks like to be in a Canadian winter. And I want to pay my respects to our elders past, present, and emerging on these lands in Ontario, where I live in Canada, and also across your lands in Wales. I always start my sessions with a minds on, and I'd like to have you think about how you replicate the structure of this session in your professional learning sessions. So starting with a minds on helps us focus what we're going to be about. I share this anchor chart, and actually I found this in one of our classrooms in Wales. I had the privilege of doing learning walks and talks in one of your schools with your colleagues. And this was in a corner, and this was before COVID. So I must say how appropriate it is now when we have the wobblies. This is what your students think we should do. Another minds on that I bring you is about leadership, because today's session is about the practicalities of everyone being a leader and what are the tools you need to think about. And so our Canadian astronaut, Chris Hadfield, who sings in space, talks about leadership not being a glorious crowning act, but actually our responsibility for laying the groundwork for success, and for me, success of all of our students. So I want to start with the end in mind, because that's just what good assessment practice is. And our end in mind is understanding leadership guiding principles to sustain the work of system and school improvement. And that's where my work rests. And of course, that system and school improvement leads us to focus in on all of our students. So how do we do that? And there are some acronyms here that I'll unpack. WOW is watching others work. And to me, I think about learning walks and talks. CMM is case management meetings. So I'll talk about those. And also BIUMW is bump it up walls. These are all tools that leaders use to really make pedagogy come to life. And that's the whole reason for us leading this work. So I start my professional learning sessions, as I encourage you to, with the minds on. And then I think about data. And this is a photo of me working with teachers and leaders in Australia, and they didn't have a data wall. So we made one in 5 minutes. So for me, it's about starting every session with data. And that means meetings, staff meetings, professional learning time, and also thinking about learning walks and talks also as data. So starting with data at every meeting frames our work, both in your schools and of course in your professional learning sessions. I always have operating norms. I think it's really important that they become co-constructed. And these are our operating norms for this session. We're going to begin and end on time. We're going to really think about our chat bar conversations. And I would encourage you to write in the chat bar, not just questions, but what you're thinking about, what connections you're making between my work as a researcher and a practitioner and your work as a leader. I want us to also invest not only in our own learning, but in the learning of others. Now, these operating norms have stood the test of time, but when they're co-constructed with your staff, you might think of other operating norms that are important to you. The point here is that we all have to agree how we're going to learn together and what's important in that learning. In every classroom, I want to see visible learning intentions. What are we learning to do here? And so I've thought of our learning intentions for this session. I'm going to start with the 14 parameters, the research that Michael Fullen and I have done into system and school improvement. I'm going to think about the non-negotiables in those parameters. And then I want to share with you the leadership behaviors and skills we need to all do this work collaboratively. So those are our learning intentions for this session, but I want to see those learning intentions also directly from the new curriculum in Wales. This is an opportunity to really investigate how the new curriculum is really transferred into classroom practice. And we can do this through learning intentions and also by co-constructing success criteria. Because you weren't with me in snowy Canada to co-construct our success criteria for this session, I developed these. They're I can statements, but we want to see those I can statements in our classrooms because students need to know what success looks like. And we don't have to make them up. They come from our new Welsh curriculum. They're right there in the standards. So you can see, I believe our success today is going to be making connections between my research and your work, being able to think about not problems, but our practice in terms of what will be our next best learning move after considering this particular webinar. And finally, it's really important to make those connections, as I've said, in the chat bar. So please, just now as I begin, put your name and your school in the chat bar. So we have an opportunity to at least meet virtually. Unfortunately, not in person, but that's certainly my goal. Michael Fullen and I began our look into system and school improvement probably about 20 years ago. And we did a lot of investigation using our 17 schools in challenging circumstances. And they were very challenging. And of those 17 schools, there were 9 schools that were jumping the curve, that were moving way beyond what we ever expected. And so we asked, I went and interviewed anyone who would talk to me in those 17 schools and said, what's happening here? Why are you doing so well and moving way beyond what we expected? And so we were fortunate then to have a lot of data from those 17 schools. And we looked at the provincial standards assessment, standards-based assessment as well. And we could see that 9 of those 17 schools were doing well. And they were the ones that we called on teachers and leaders to say, what's making a difference? And we categorize the interview data into these 14 areas. And it wasn't just one teacher or principal, it was all of the teachers and principals in those 9 schools that said, this is what we're doing. So they became known as the 14 parameters. Michael just said, let's call them parameters. And so they've become really a living piece of evidence in how we look at system and school improvement and how we align both what's going on in systems and the focus in system with the focus in schools. And I've just taken the opportunity to highlight in red 3 of those parameters. I think it's unrealistic for me to be able to cover all 14, although they're all important. The 3 that I've highlighted are kind of hierarchical. They are called, Michael and I call them non-negotiable, but it's important to know they all weave together. And the work I've been doing across Wales is unpacking these parameters and seeing how they really work together. So let's take a look in the time that we have into those 3 parameters that we call non-negotiable. And then I'm going to end the session by looking at leadership. What does it take to lead this work? So in thinking about our work in Wales and my work in Wales, as Alma mentioned, over the last 2.5 years, has been about taking what's important in education in Wales and marrying that with the 14 parameters. So I'm going to invite my dear colleague and good friend, Sally, to talk to us about this work that we did in Wales together. Sally, how are we aligning the 14 parameters with your documents in Wales?
Well, Prynhawn da, Lyn, it's lovely to have you back in Wales, albeit virtually today. Yes, we've done a lot of work over the last 2 years at thinking about how the 14 parameters in the work that you've shared with us aligns with, connects to some of the our very own circles that we have in Wales. I know the 14 parameter wheel that you shared with us in your work, and you often say not to be written as a list, as a hierarchical list, that it exists as a wheel, as do a lot of our guidance in Wales, really, a lot of our kind of standards and documentation. So I'm sure everyone's familiar with this circle, the professional standards for teaching and leadership. So there are 5 standards, but within them, obviously 32 descriptors. So some more detail as we drill down. And we did some work with some of our schools who've been involved with looking at clarity and the leading collaborative learning work that you've been doing with us in Wales. And it's really easy, actually, to pick out, if we just take one example from the pedagogy standard here, managing the learning environment, how you're writing around the third teacher and the importance of the classroom environment, and that we can use that really as a strategic tool in promoting creativity and originality, perseverance, risk-taking, you know, that managing the learning environment, which is just one of our standards, really chimes with your guidance around the third teacher. And if you move the slide on, Lyn, to look at the next circle, again, this is probably another Trivial Pursuit pie that people are familiar with, the schools as learning organization model from the OECD, from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, who've identified these 7 dimensions as important to schools in Wales developing themselves as learning organizations to be ready to deal with, adapt to all the transformation that's coming down the channels to us in terms of the new curriculum, but in terms of other types of reform as well. And so we can see here some of the priorities around modeling and growing learning leadership, being so akin, Lyn, to the idea of principal as lead learner, which is one of the 14 parameters that you've shared with us. So it's not difficult when we start to unpick each of these models to see areas of alignment. And we got our schools to do just that, didn't we? About 18 months ago in the Liberty Stadium, we had colleagues from schools across Wales sat together with all of these circles, all these different Trivial Pursuit wedges, just trying to think about that alignment and making sense of it for themselves and creating some new diagrams that really help them to sense make the connection. So we've got some examples on the slides there of the library of a learning organization and how that might look, and where the 14 parameters sit with the SLO dimensions and with the professional standards as well. So certainly lots of work been done trying to find alignment here, and really not struggling to do that with the work that you're bringing to Wales. So thanks for sharing that, Lyn.
Yes, thanks so much, Sally, for that. We've had a really excellent time together in Wales, and my only regret is that I'm not there right now. We really looked at all of your documents and really wanted to be sure, I wanted to be sure specifically, that the documents and the thinking in Wales aligned with the research that I continue to do, and certainly does. And I guess the other thing that I think about is, and is I'm pretty excited about, is your work around schools as learning organizations, because that was a huge part of my thesis with Ken Leafwood. What does it look like when schools are learning organizations? And that's really the foundation of the 14 parameters. And as Sally said, we love circles. Circles to me say that's never-ending work. We just get better and better at what we do. And one of the things that for me is really important to know is that the 14 parameters are about equity and excellence. And for me, that equity piece is about all students, all teachers, all leaders, teachers, and students can clearly articulate why they do what they do. And in presenting just a while ago to the Netherlands, Michael Fullen and I said, it's really about no subgroup doing better than another group. That was our definition of equity and excellence. And so I'm going to ask a few rhetorical questions during our time together that you might record. And that is, how are your subgroups doing? Have you unpacked the data? And do you have all subgroups equally growing and achieving? Really important for us to understand what equity and excellence means. Now, if you do have your Clarity text with you, on page 11, you'll see the 14 parameters in a list. Unfortunately, as Sally said, we're really looking at circles. And unfortunately, Michael said, don't put those 14 parameters in a list because people will think they're a checklist. But for convenience, I wanted to show that the 14 parameters are here. And then, of course, Corwin, my publisher, took those 14 parameters and put them in a circle. And around the circle, we'll see the third teacher. And that to me is important because we're developing that collaborative culture of learning throughout our learning spaces by lots of anchor charts. We've got learning intentions and co-constructed success criteria on the walls. So students are surrounded with learning, not only in the classroom, but right throughout the school. They can see what success looks like. Now, I mentioned we would only look at 3 of them today because we don't have time, and I want to discuss leadership as well to do this work. So the 3 parameters that really are non-negotiable are parameter 1 and 14 are bookends, developing that culture of learning, and parameter 6, which is putting faces on the data. So let's have a look at how I envisage parameter number 1. It's in chapter 2 of Clarity. If you're following along in your text, you can tab that. But there are 4 dimensions of parameter number 1, those shared beliefs and understandings. And again, you'll see the word all teachers, all students. We have high expectations. We know how to teach each student, and that's about early and ongoing intervention, which is parameter 6. And my goal is that every teacher sees themselves as an intervention teacher. And finally, the last dimension is teachers, leaders, and students can clearly articulate what they do every single day. And if they can't articulate what they're doing, then we need to eliminate that practice. So we really want to be able to explain to our stakeholders, to our policymakers, to our parents, our constituents, why we're leading this learning in the way we are. And students can clearly articulate that as well. So parameter 1 is about that whole school approach to those 4 dot points, a whole school approach to shared beliefs and understandings. And we really do mean all students can learn. We really do mean that. And so I'll just give you an example of one head teacher who took each of those 4 dot points, those 4 dimensions of parameter 1, and said, what does each one look like in our school? What is it? What is it not? And they really unpacked each of those dimensions to understand what parameter 1 looks like, because they were developing a culture of learning within their school. Do we really believe that all students can learn, and do we have high expectations? Have we set targets? Have we got data discussions, and do we co-construct that meaning in all of our professional learning sessions? What does it look like in your school when all students achieve high standards, given the right time and support? So in everyone being a leader, our work number 1 is implementing continuously, going back to parameter 1. And we do that by knowing the faces of our students and what triage is necessary for those students who are below the expected level. to give the example of parameter 1. I want you to meet Louis. He's one of our students in secondary school. Unfortunately, Louis fell between the cracks in our system. And I use Louis because it's an example from our system, not anyone else's system. But I'm sure that Louis exist in every school system. And do we really believe all students can learn? And how do we wrap around that belief with our students who aren't achieving? Just know that he's bright and he learned how to be illiterate and hide it. So when Louis came to my attention when he was in grade 11, I thought, how could this happen? How could this happen when our focus was on literacy in every content area? So think about the Louis in your school and how every one of your teachers needs to be an intervention teacher and can teach Louis. So to me, that looks at how our case management meetings can surround and support a teacher to become proficient in teaching all students. So Heather had a support group called the Case Management Meeting that she met with every week to support her. Louis and Heather worked after school because we wanted to ensure that his self-concept was intact. In fact, that he became a more confident learner. Louis did pass our Ontario Secondary School Literacy Test eventually and graduated from one of our high schools. And that's really important to me. And I want to show a story that's really been successful because Heather and the teachers around here all knew how to support Louis, how to diagnose and then create that trust and environment of learning for Louis, where he could learn in that safe environment. And the outcome is that Louis is a very successful contributing citizen now in one of our cities in the jurisdiction where I worked. And he probably makes more money than everyone here on the screen because he owns a Porsche dealership. And he can read and write and think critically. And that is certainly, and do math, that's certainly our definition and success criteria for all of our students graduating from our high schools. So just before I chat with Jeremy, I'd like everyone in the chat bar to write something to all of us that's a takeaway. What did you learn? How would you build the confidence to do this work in your school for any of the Louis you have? So please write something now in the chat bar. And while people are doing that, I'm going to stop for a moment and then ask Jeremy to think about his connection.
Hi, Lyn. I'll start if you like. First of all, brilliant. I'm really enjoying what you're saying, and it really resonates with me. Just for those that don't know me, I've been in education now I was just trying to work it out, about 39 years in the teaching side, and more recently working in university settings. The thing that is really important is about this culture, this supportive culture, the kind of parameters 1 and 14 that create a culture where we care about every individual child. And having that data, the one that springs to my mind is we used to do a survey in school which got the children to talk about their attitude to themselves and to school and their schooling. And we picked up a couple of children, but the one I'm going to talk about in particular wasn't feeling good either about themselves or school. And we picked that up, and we had a meeting together involving the assistants, the support. Our school had a culture, a very nurturing, caring culture, and we picked that up. And with a little bit of digging and a little bit of investigation, we found out that the parents of this individual had split, and there was no the impact that was having on that child's progress was quite significant, in that they were angry, they weren't trying, and so on. And with the right kind of interventions from both the class teacher and other support that we had in school, we were able to put in something, but also engage with those parents, because they had no idea the impact it was having on their daughter's progress. So I think we made a massive difference there. And I think it really is important to know individual children, have this kind of data wall, so that you can notice, you can spot every child. As you say, all children are so important. So that's an example from my school.
That's a great one, Jeremy. Thank you so much. So, and this is Jeremy's example and the Louis example are all about parameter 1. Do we really believe all students can learn? And I just wanted to say that this isn't just a secondary implementation. This is a whole system, whole school approach. An example of a student who's in year 1 and is having trouble reading. And so parameter 1 is about knowing the strategies and approaches that will work and can be differentiated for all students. I'm going to ask Sally to reflect and that it is primary and secondary. And Sally, there might be some chat bar comments too about this that you can allude to. All students, secondary and primary. It's the resources that teachers need to ensure that they have just right, just in time materials to work with, knowing the instructional starting points of every student and knowing how to take them on. So I'd like you to know that Ryan is now a wonderful reader. And it was because he had that teacher who could intervene early in his reading. So Sally, can you make some connections for us?
There's some wonderful comments in the chat, Lynn, that I think you'd like to hear about, really in response to Louis, but the same could be true of this video as well. So I'm just going to read a few of them, if that's okay. So one comment is, it exemplifies the importance for leaders in all contexts to create time for teachers to understand learners and to discover their specific needs. It's equally important to then use the data to put relevant and bespoke support in place to allow children to flourish.
Wow,
another one,
fabulous.
That's powerful stuff there, isn't it? And another one I really liked as well. All behavior is communication. Literacy is key. And that really made me think of how much importance Clarity places on that gateway skill of literacy, and how in Wales that's a real focus for us at the moment as we move towards a new curriculum. And our education minister is prioritising reading and oracy at the moment, particularly in response to the COVID pandemic as part of the Renew and Reform agenda. It's so vital that our learners, from the very earliest experiences they have right the way through to further education and higher education, have that bespoke literacy support that they need to meet them where they are and help them to make that progress. And we do have things in place in the curriculum guidance, in the framework, the literacy and numeracy framework, the cross-curricular skills framework. We have diagnostic personalised assessments in Wales for reading and for numeracy as well. And it's really about us as teachers being able to use the tools at our disposal to best support the needs of every individual learner. And that's such a challenge to us in Wales, as I'm sure it is to learners across the globe, to really provide for their individual needs, to make sure nobody falls through the cracks.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sally. And it just reminds me to say that we're always teaching literacy. If literacy is reading, writing, speaking, listening, viewing, representing, doing mathematics and thinking critically, that's a skill that we continue from the early years like Brian to our senior secondary school. So thank you for making those connections. I'm going to move on now to parameter 6, and it is in chapter 7, looking at putting faces on the data. through data wall that we talked about, and also those case management meetings that surrounded Heather in her work with Louis. And we have some amazing examples right in your very midst of data walls. And you see this one, it has curtains around it. So really, if you don't write anything else down, please write down that data walls are private spaces for teachers and leaders to know every face in their care. And Sally, just quickly talking about this data wall.
Yes, so this was an example from one of the schools in Pembrokeshire that I was fortunate to work with in the past. And I think the concept of data walls, or war rooms, as sometimes they were called back in the day, when they, level 2 inclusive was everything, and we had to make sure everybody got over the line in terms of maths and English. The same children had to get over the line for us to sort of hit that accountability measure. And that kind of war room is not the kind of war room you're really talking about with data walls. You're talking about putting the data and the faces together in a way that allows us to be really reflective about the progress of individual learners. Every learner counts, and to see those learners move up through that. In this case, we've got the sort of RAG rated, haven't we, approach here, but with the red, orange and green. But the idea that this data wall is the starting point for the discussion for those case management meetings, which is so important, which I know you're going to come on to talk about. So using the data to support learners to make progress.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sally. And as teachers co-construct the data wall with leaders, they stand back and have conversations. What about all those students in the red? What are we doing? What's working? And of course, I never get into the discussion about Excel spreadsheets. Are they data walls? And can you have electronic data walls? Instead, I developed a success criteria for a data wall. And it has to be co-constructed, and it has to provide an opportunity for rich conversation in a private place. And we can at a glance see which students can come to a case management meeting. So our case management meetings start at the data wall, and they really unpack the pedagogical principles that we have in place in Wales. So this particular anchor chart is about, here's the what that we're focusing on. And where do we do this? In a case management meeting. And how do we do it? That's the discussion at the case management meeting. How do we know how to use these pedagogical principles for students who aren't achieving where we want them to be? And it's all about teachers teaching teachers. That's what the case management meeting is about. And on our data wall, I love this secondary school who's used the QR codes to contain the template from the case management meeting, which is in Clarity, and put it right there. So you can see at a glance on your data wall who has come to a case management meeting, not in person. The student doesn't come in person, but through a piece of student work. I think the power of the case management meetings is that they're short, sharp, and shiny, 15 minutes. And there are templates for the meeting and for the follow-up meeting in Clarity. We never have the meeting and go away and don't think about the meeting or the student again or the teacher. We always envelop the teacher with support in between the first meeting and when the teacher comes back again to report how did the recommended strategy work. And we ask the teacher, how's it going? Any support I can give you with between the times when the teacher then comes back to the next case management meeting. So I was certainly a once over lightly around parameter 6, those two big pieces, data walls and case management meetings. And finally, we go to parameter 14, which really envelops that culture of learning that we're collaboratively developing. And parameter 14, that shared responsibility and accountability, is about owning all the students' faces, knowing those faces, knowing how to teach each, and how we support each other in being responsible and accountable for all our students right across Wales, not just in one school. So having said that, I really want to delve into, okay, so we've developed the framework somewhat, the non-negotiables, and we'll again in time look at all of those parameters. What does it mean to me when we believe that everyone on this call is a leader? So to me, leadership is about knowing the vision, and not only what we can do, but actually what are the tools so we can unpack the how of increasing all students' growth and achievement. So parameter 14 is certainly about focusing on the what and the how. And it's not one size fits all. It's looking at your data to decide which of those parameters besides the non-negotiables you need to focus on in your context, which is really important. So I'm going to just pause for a moment and ask Jeremy, why do you think parameters 1, 6, and 14 are non-negotiable?
In my experience, I think the 1 and 14, as I said earlier, allude to the culture, the taking collective responsibility, collaboration between all staff, having that shared vision and the purpose, asking, starting with the why almost. Why are we in the job that we're in? Why do we do what we do? As well as then the how, the what and the how. So I think without those, we don't have a learning organization. And I think that's really, really important so that we can continue to improve. And without the data, we could be barking up the wrong tree. And, we've done that many times in education over the 30 plus years I've been in that. Is what we're doing evidence-based? Do we own it? Do we know about it? I absolutely agree with you about making this data visible. Because again, when we bury data in spreadsheets and it goes in the computer, it doesn't have the same effect. And I know from my experience of working with industry, they have walls, they have data walls, they share their vision. They sometimes have curtains where they don't want outsiders to see what they're doing as an organization. But certainly, I think without those three, then it would be very difficult to enact the others.
Exactly. Thank you so much for that summary, because it's a summary of the 14 parameters and why there are non-negotiables and how all of them work together. And we're going to just go into leadership. And what does leadership really mean? This is one of our head teachers who sent me this picture. It looks like leadership is easy, but actually the work is underneath. And you'll see that she said hard work twice, which I think is really, really descriptive of what leadership you need to do this work together. And by now you should be asking, does this work? So these are our data statistics in Ontario, and I bolded the increase because I love increases. So this is our Ontario Secondary School Literacy Test and how we've improved and increased our percentage. And now we have over 90% of our students passing that literacy test, and they can't graduate from one of our secondary schools unless they do. It starts with being able to read by the end of grade 1. And we've certainly made a huge increase there as we focused on how to teach reading, writing, and critical thinking. And our graduation rates have increased as well. So to me, leaders reflect on their data, not only the school data, but the system data. They know how to unpack it. I use a Foursquare to look at data and make it simple. It doesn't have to be a really complicated analysis of system and school data. But it's important, just like at our data wall, that it causes us to ask questions and take risks that we become consciously skilled in looking at data and interpreting it to make decisions about instruction. And I want to remind everyone that data is student work. So student work is data. So here's Ethan on the left at I think in the first week of year one. Here's Ethan's work on the right, 17 weeks later. And I have to ask you, can all your students teach Ethan to move from the example on the left to the example on the right? That is ensuring that data encompasses student work. And we certainly look at these examples of students in term 1 and then term 3. Look at the incredible difference. And what would be the conversation you would have in your case management meetings with teachers, teaching teachers how we move a student from term 1 to term 3. In this case, again, a C student in term, really below C student in term 3. In term 1, sorry, on the left, and term 3 on the right, same student. So that to me is about ensuring data informs our instruction, our differentiated instruction, and our capacity to teach all students. So I'm going to ask Alma to reflect on leadership for us. Alma.
Thanks, Lynn. Yeah, I mean, one of the things I'm reflecting upon is how important leadership is. And so often we get hung up on the idea of leadership as being a role or a set of responsibilities. And clearly it is, but I think you're talking about a different form of leadership here. I think you're talking about leadership for learning. And I think one of the things that we know is that leadership is second only to the importance of teaching and learning when it comes to student learning outcomes. So we need leaders at all levels. And I think the 2 points made on this slide about transformational and instructional leadership, and I know there are lots of labels for leadership, but just to pause on these 2 very important forms. The first is transformational, which is really about transforming the organization. It speaks to the culture of the organization. And the second is instructional, and I'm not too fond of the word instructional because it sort of means you instruct, where that's not the real core of this particular leadership model. It's about the connection of leadership to teaching and learning. And that's why every teacher at one level is a leader, because they have influence in their classroom, they have influence over their students. So I think your work speaks to the importance of leadership at all levels, not just about position and role.
Thank you so much. Yes, and I absolutely agree. I don't like those titles, transformational and instructional. I actually want us to think about being strategic. And to me, it's about having a vision. It's about understanding how to build consensus. It's about distributing the responsibility for all students. It's about asking ourselves the tough questions. What do I need to learn more about? And where will I get that learning from? It's about leaders having a vision of everyone being a knowledgeable other, not knowledgeable about everything, but having expertise in an area and sharing it. And I talk about the importance of embedding knowledgeable others in all of our schools in Chapter 8. Teachers becoming consciously skilled, and that goes back to parameter 1 as well. So, Alma, I wonder if you could share some of your thoughts about the importance of distributed leadership.
Yeah, thanks, Lynn. I mean, those who know me will know I write quite a lot about distributed leadership. And here we have another adjective for leadership. But I think in a way, distributed leadership connects directly to your work, Lynn, because it's fundamentally about collaboration and it's fundamentally about connection. And I think a couple of things about distributed leadership. It's not delegation. It's really the empowerment of teachers and others within the schools, knowledgeable others, to lead. And it's ultimately about influence, because when you boil down leadership, it's fundamentally about influence, and hopefully influence for good. The connections I'm making here are all to do with the collaborative practices that you're talking about within a school that enables all learners to learn. And I think the emphasis is upon all learners. And I think you've reinforced the importance of equity here. And I think in terms of distributed leadership, it's really about connection. It's really about capacity building. It's really about making sure that leadership isn't just the best kept secret in the school, but actually leadership is a connector that builds the capacity for change within any organisation, but particularly at the school level. So collaboration, commitment, and I think the capacity to really ensure that all learners learn and no child is left behind.
Excellent. Thank you, Alma. And for me, that distributed leadership must be authentic. When we share leadership, we actually give people the responsibility and accountability and don't keep interfering, actually letting our teachers lead, and we lead from behind. So you can see in our work collecting what behaviors make a difference in collaborative leadership, you can see it starts with strong relationships. We won't be surprised at what our participants said when we collected the data before we wrote Leading Collaborative Learning. And we see the skills and behaviors that leaders must possess to be collaborative. And it always starts with articulating a clear purpose and vision for our work. And really respecting research, respecting the work that Alma and her colleagues do in integrating it into practice in our schools. And one of the other leadership skills I looked at was adaptability, how we adapt in these very difficult times. And so I've written quite a bit about that in Clarity before we ever had COVID. So now more than ever, it's really important that we have the ability to adapt, to change direction as we have in COVID. In COVID times. So there are 6 dimensions I talk about in terms of leaders and the skills we need. And I share with you how we deliberately pause and think about using this tool as what's in my circle of practice and what's outside as leaders, and how will I get the outside inside. And so in finishing, I just think how important it is that we understand the dimensions of the 14 parameters and how leadership is woven into every one of those parameters. And I want to look at one more opportunity for Alma to, I'm just going to find the slide for Alma, when we look at what strategic leaders do in learning organizations. And I'll ask Alma to reflect on that and pull our time together to a close. So Alma?
Yeah, thanks, Lynn. I mean, I think that you've highlighted the importance of leadership at all levels and the relationship between the leader and the culture of the organization and the outcomes. We need leadership that's infused right across the school. But I think this slide talks towards the importance of knowing all the students, which you reinforced throughout your presentation, the focus on the quality of teaching in all classrooms. And that's, I guess, the instructional leadership piece. Having a knowledgeable other, we all need a knowledgeable other on our side. And I think leaders need a knowledgeable other on their side. And finally, this relentless and compelling focus on learning. I mean, this is why I think your work speaks so clearly to the leadership of learning in our schools, not the leadership of the organization, but the leadership of the core business, if I can put it like that, which is about teaching and learning.
Thank you so much, Alma. It is about teaching and learning and leadership, and they all go hand in hand. I just want to share with you in closing an email I got this morning, and I'm just so excited about it. This came in an email to me this morning from Emma Reed, who's the assistant head teacher in St. Albans in Pontypool. And she's been experimenting with Bump It Up walls in year 10. And what she says is so important to us in knowing that there are pockets of excellence across Wales doing this work. So she writes, this work has led to students teaching the class in groups from our learning board. And there's their co-constructed Bump It Up wall. The class spoke really positively about the experience of being so involved in planning their learning. That says everything to me. And your homework following this session is about testing our 5 questions in Learning Walks and Talks. There they are on the screen. How would your students do in answering those questions? And I want you to try those questions out and assess whether your teaching is absolutely clear enough so that students know what they're learning, why they're learning it, how they're doing, and how they can improve. That's really what the work is about. So those 5 questions are a tool for you as a leader. And remember that everyone's a leader, and you need that consistency and persistence and insistence on seeing quality teaching and learning in every one of your classrooms. So always in my sessions, I go back to our success criteria, because that's what we've established in this work, making connections with the success criteria. So Jeremy, you have the last word here. How did we do with our success criteria, just briefly?
Thanks, Lynn. Yeah, the time has gone so quickly, and absolutely, I've been able to make connections. I'm sure everybody has, with those 14 parameters, with the leadership, and what we're trying to achieve in Wales, which is a really exciting time, as you know, in Wales, the co-construction of the new curriculum and all the reform that is happening. There's a couple there that I'm going to have to mull over and think about and really reflect on, if I'm being honest. But certainly I chair a collaborative research network across Wales, and I know these are some of the things that I will be taking back to them to think about as well. So thank you very much. That's great.
Thank you, Jeremy. And I would invite everyone now to leave a final comment in the chat bar. What's your takeaway? Jeremy's got a takeaway from our work today. What will be your takeaway? And then I'm going to encourage that the EWC save that chat bar, because that's data to me and I want to read it over. So please put your comment in the chat bar as we finish our conversation together today. And again, I only wish that I were with you in person. Remember that clarity develops as we go, not before we go. So don't wait to be clear about your work. Give it a go. And thank you so much for being with me. And over to you now, Angela.
Well, thank you to you, Professor Sharratt. It's been an absolute joy. It's a superb masterclass that you shared with us today. It really did provoke thought, as you'll have seen from the comments in the chat bar. You made us integral to the presentations that you've given today, and you've provoked thought, but also called us to action with a real wow factor. So it was really a privilege to be able to watch others working in Canada and Australia, and indeed in schools in Wales. And it's been absolutely wonderful to see participants from all corners of Wales here today joining us this afternoon. And I hope that you'll be able, for those of you who are with us today, to talk to your colleagues about the rich learning experience that Professor Sharratt has been able to provide for us today, and encourage those who haven't been able to join us live, as it were, to check out the recordings that will be on the EWC website when it becomes available. It's been an absolute joy, and your passion and enthusiasm for helping all learners in all settings, and that shared responsibility that we all have to support learning wherever and however we can. I just want to thank you very, very much for being here today, and also for our collaborators through the University Swansea and the other contributors that have been in Jeremy and Sally today. So thank you so much, everybody. I know it's been a success. We will save the data bar for you as a rich learning experience in itself. And as I say, we'll be back to share this via a recording as soon as possible. So diolch yn fawr iawn I chi. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much, Angela. I'm just thrilled to be able to work with my colleagues and good friends in Wales, and I really look forward to being there in person. So please put something in the chat bar and do your homework. Ask those 5 questions of your students. Thanks again, everyone.
Thank you so much. And just before we close formally, just to encourage everybody who's been here today to check further events on our EWC website. And a special thank you once again to friends and colleagues in the University of Swansea. Diolch yn fawr i chi gyd.